All right. 6 o'clock, everybody stand, take our hats off and say the pledge of allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excellent. All right. Can you hear us, Steve?
I can.
I have one person coming in right now.
Another Zoomer?
Carrie, is that right, Todd?
Yeah, Carrie and maybe Francis are also going to join us tonight. Yeah. And if we have a spot in the agenda where I can ask that you adjust agenda items to move critical areas up in our discussion.
Okay. To sooner than later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sooner than later in the discussion items. We have Francis, English and Carrie.
Okay.
There are consultants for the critical areas, and I know that they had a bit they wanted to talk about, but if we can let them do their thing and drop off,
Sure,
it'll save a buck or two.
that's okay with me. Shall we push that before we do anything?
No,
Is that
no,
up?
you can
Okay.
get through official business. We can get down to the discussion items, so
What did you want to move, Todd? I'm sorry.
just
Critical
move
areas.
the critical areas to the top of the list for discussion items down on the bottom of the list.
Got
So once we get through normal planning commission business.
Rachel is the report going.
Yeah.
For have multiple Zoomers, I'm not trusting.
I'm lying. It wasn't.
Okay, so we got ourselves a quorum. Call for other business items. Okay. Approval for the consent agenda.
Yep, with moving the critical areas.
Okay. Moving the critical areas to there. Okay, meeting minutes. Want to go over the last meeting minutes or do we do critical?
That's what the consent agenda is. So just call a vote on that.
What?
I need a motion.
Do we need,
Yeah, you need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
why don't we approve the minutes and business licenses?
Okay,
You're done?
do I get a second for that?
Second.
Second, all right, excellent.
Yeah,
All right,
you could still
there we
stay
go.
though. We like having people here.
Yeah.
I'm interested now.
Yeah.
We need to vote though.
You gotta vote
Oh,
here.
All in favor?
All right.
All right. Now we're to critical areas. Todd?
Yes, sir. I think we are.
Okay.
And we did prepare a staff report for that. I'd like to introduce Francis Neglich. He's the bottom square on our screen there. Francis is a wetlands and habitat biologist. He's done many critical areas permits, and he's worked with jurisdictions through their critical area code updates. Both Francis and Carrie are the lead from Ecological Land Services. They're a company that specializes in this type of thing. And I brought them onto the team to help us with the critical areas updates required by the Growth Management Act. So Francis, thanks for joining.
Can you hear me all?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'll lead off with
Yeah, thank you.
the staff report, and then I think Francis had a few things that he wanted to highlight specifically with some of the changes that are occurring, some of the more significant changes. The critical areas updates are part of our required comprehensive plan update, and those include updates to wetlands, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, frequently flooded areas, geologic hazard areas, and critical aquifer recharge areas. The state has a list of legislative changes that have occurred since the last comprehensive plan update. When we were reviewing the critical areas components of Toledo's code, we found that it had been a lot longer since you updated yours. So rather than start with yours as a base, and we discussed this a little bit previously, we decided to use Lewis County's as a base because theirs has just been updated a couple of years ago. So basically our approach in this process is we'll start with the Lewis County code. And then we'll update that to meet the few changes and requirements that have occurred over the last couple of years. And then that's what we'll take forward as part of this comprehensive plan update. So we're revising that section of your zoning code, and then we'll come up with corresponding comprehensive plan elements that support that zoning code. So with that, I think that's maybe a good segue to Francis and his notes on some of the more significant changes in critical area regulations. Tonight's just an introduction to the topic. I don't plan on bringing any code to you tonight. We're not that deep in it yet. Next month, we'll probably start off with maybe the frequently flooded areas. I don't know if you all have a preference, but we're going to push the wetland and habitat. You won't see Francis again probably for a couple months, couple more meetings. So we'll work through the critical aquifer recharge areas. I think that's an easy one. There aren't many changes that need to occur there, if any, to the Lewis County code. The geologic hazard areas, there's only a couple there too. So maybe we take those two for next month. And then we'll bring back frequently flooded areas and then maybe start to dig into wetlands and habitat. That'll give Francis and his team a little bit of time to spool up and get things ready. So.
And this is in regards to like from our last comprehensive plan when the buffers kind of got tripled, like from what they used to be, basically, is what's talking about.
That's what's happening. And
Okay.
and that is a good segue
There you go.
into Francis and his team for what they've noted have been significant. Francis?
Okay, so I think Todd either brought or shared with you a kind of a table of some of the key, probably the two biggest issues that the city will have to face going forward is recommendations from Fish and Wildlife, first of all, on oak tree mitigation. That never really had a guidance before. It was more done on a county by county basis. Fish and Wildlife was mostly a commenter or a reviewer on oak tree mitigation. I know Toledo has oak trees in your area. I don't know specifically about inside the city, but I know outside the city, probably in the urban growth area, there are probably oak trees and oak stands. The mitigation guidance that they've come up with this last year came out in 2024. Is very extensive, requires a lot of mitigation, very expensive for developers, applicants, even home builder, single family home builders, or building their own homes. So that is something the city is going to have to grapple with, and we'll try to help you through that to recognize that it's a guidance only, but if they get involved in any reviews of projects, they could really want a lot more mitigation. I think some of it's unreasonable, and it's so expensive for our clients that they can't afford to do that. So we have to address it somehow, and I'll be looking forward to some discussions on how we do that. So that's oak. The other one is stream buffers. The Fish and Wildlife Service, that's the Department of Fish and Wildlife Service from the state, now wants the buffers on streams determined by a site class, and it's based upon how tall a tree can get, a conifer tree, typically a fir tree or hemlock or cedar, within 200 years of growth, the height of that tree based upon a soil type, and that gets you a site class, and then that site class translates into a buffer width for fish-bearing shoreline streams all the way down to non-fish seasonal streams. That is going to be another problem for the city. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to deal with that. So we've put in here, I think, what Clark County has already done. I don't suggest we use them, but it'll give you kind of some guidance. And we've also included what Lewis County has now, which is before this site potential tree height proposal by Fish and Wildlife, City of Camas. So anyway, once again, I think those suggestions from the state are unrealistic for cities. They're just, those buffers are just too big. So we have to figure out how that's going to work out and how we navigate that with them. And maybe Todd will then tell you how this process works, whether it's the city sets what you think the buffers need to be, and then we see if the state fights back, pushes back, or maybe it's a discussion and a compromise. But the buffers have gotten, on some of these streams, have gotten very, very big. We were used to like a non-fish seasonal stream, which is basically a stream that would trickle for part of the year and then go dry. Those buffers used to be 25 feet or 50 feet in a lot of jurisdictions, and now they want 100 feet. So that's a quadrupling or doubling of those buffers. So anyway, there's kind of what we're up against. I don't think wetland buffers are going to be a big issue. I don't think I've seen much in the way of change for those. So yeah, this oak issue and the stream issue are going to be the biggest ones that Toledo is going to have to face.
What is the oak height buffer? What are the numbers on the oak height?
So oak doesn't have a buffer, so that's a good thing. You don't have to worry about a buffer to an oak tree. But if you get in the root zone potentially of an oak tree or have to cut the oak tree down, for example, they may want you to plant 200 trees to replace that one lost oak tree. And then if you figure out the spacing on that, which is like almost a 10-foot by 10-foot spacing, you're eating up a half acre of land of tree planting just to mitigate that one oak tree. And I just think, once again, that's not feasible for a lot of people, not only in rural areas, but definitely in cities.
Space.
What were we doing for 2?
So if you're planning to plant an oak right now, would not be a good idea. And you're
Yeah, let's not do that.
Well, and I think it's a specific type of oak too. It's not all oak trees are equal when it comes to this.
Is it-
There's,
I think
Gary White?
White oak
Yeah.
and Oregon.
Oregon
Yeah.
white oak.
Oregon white oak, okay.
Yeah, so if you have a commercial or a non-native oak or ornamental oak planted in your yard, if that can be proved that that's not Oregon white oak, then you're fine. But it's the Oregon white oak that they're most concerned about. And I guess our concept is when you take out an old oak tree that's very old, they feel like the habitat value of that to be replaced has to be represented by lots of little trees, and that's how they get this big area of mitigation. We're challenging that on a new project coming in down in Clark County, where our clients are trying to build a housing development, and they could actually have for 80 oaks that they're taking out, which are all different sizes. I think their impact is about 1.25 acre of canopy. If you total up all those tree canopies, the mitigation that Fish and Wildlife wants ends up being 19 acres of land. And in Clark County, you're not going to find that. The land costs are too high.
And 19 acres of a monocrop oak forest is actually not a good habitat.
One could argue that, yes.
Glorious.
so one of the other items that we had talked about, Francis, and I know this isn't as significant as the oak mitigation and the potential change in stream buffer widths, was the functional isolation. You had mentioned in our conversation previously that things, so maybe you could talk a little bit about what functional isolation is and what the changes are and how that might impact a development.
Sure. So buffers, whether it's wetlands or streams, typically kind of get a pass on protecting the buffer if there's already a road, a house, building, sometimes landscaping even already in the buffer. And that's the case in a lot of urban areas or even rural areas. You've got buildings or whatever. So we don't have to buffer you don't have to buffer past those activities. That just makes perfect sense. I mean, why would you have to put a buffer on the opposite side of a street from a resource? Because the street's got cars going on it. So, but they have tightened up the functional isolation in Clark County, for example, it used to be a single driveway could be a functionally isolated buffer and stop the buffer on that property. Now now Clark County wants you to prove that it provides enough traffic to support 3 homes, and then they'll let you do that clause or buffer reduction. And I kind of think that's a little bit overreaching too. A lot of people might be on a busy driveway with 2 homes, kids driving in and out all the day, and a busy family. I mean, you could have a lot of traffic, and it's just kind of ridiculous that it wouldn't qualify for functionally isolated buffer if it's just 2 homes.
So
Now,
those are,
is the state of Washington offering any substitute mitigation? In California, at times, if you had a habitat area that you wanted to impact and it was unfeasible for you to donate that much land to it, you could actually purchase land in a set aside area somewhere else, and that would take place for your mitigation.
Yeah,
that
so you're
something-
talking.
I'm sorry?
Yes. No, you're talking about either a conservation bank
Right.
or, we have wetland banks now. There are 2 oak banks in Clark County. We're trying to get a 3rd one set up. So that is one way that the developer could buy credits from oak mitigation. And usually the ratios of replacement are less. So because there's more certainty in that banker keeping the property as oak habitat in the future. So there is an opportunity. The state is not setting those up though. It's pretty much set up by either a county process, and then it's usually proposed by a private party. So you could have a farmer or a landowner who has a bunch of oak trees who's willing to put it into conservation covenant, could sell credits for oak mitigation in that area.
That's a deal.
Hey, Bri, you want to sell some land?
Yeah, yeah, I got some space that I could put some oak trees on there.
Forever.
Yeah, forever. Never ever build there again. Not even squirrel houses.
Mhm.
All right.
Well, I will say when this new guidance came out, some of my clients and some of the people I work with, they started collecting acorns so they grow oaks, because there's going to be a demand for mitigation no matter what. Even if you don't use these standards and you have something less, there's still going to be a demand for oak mitigation. And I think one thing we need to do for Toledo is actually, Todd, we need to probably look at how much land in the city or urban growth area actually is constrained by oak trees, and try to think about that a little bit now.
yeah, I don't know a good way. I mean, GIS doesn't map those. I mean, they might be identifiable in aerial photos, but maybe not. I don't know. I'm not a tree person. But they do have a fairly engaged community here. So, we can always ask the planning commission or community members to kind of do a little tree inventory and kind of give us some data
Yeah.
to let us know, how many of these Oregon white oaks exist within your city limits or within your downtown or wherever.
Yeah, I can ask the DNR rep for the area. The one oak stand that I know of is on Spencer.
Yeah.
Is that right? That's the only one I know
Good
of.
one. I mean, there might be one here and there, but I don't know that
Yeah.
they're Oregon white oak is.
I don't think so.
I think they're ornamental, but
Yeah,
it'd be worth taking.
that's
a
the
drive
only one I
around.
can think of. Is also not in our UGA, so.
So the interesting thing about this is it's not just a stand, it's individual
Right.
Oregon white oaks actually count, and that, so it's not, in this case, one tree makes a stand as far as the regulations are concerned, or the guidance, I guess, is
Yeah.
what it is.
But it's also not a buffer. It's
It's a
what
mitigation.
one for many. So yeah.
Yeah, whenever you're impacting, I mean, usually I think what they look at is the drip line, because that's about the root zone
Okay.
equivalent. So when you're impacting
Yeah,
inside the drip line, then that's when your mitigation ratios start.
Right.
And then if you remove a tree, then that's when some of the guidance is saying 200. So
Is this just Washington, do you know, or is it also Oregon or Idaho?
Just Washington. It's funny, they're named Oregon white oak. There's a lot more of them in Oregon, and they don't have any regulations to protect them.
Right.
The ratio now, or up until this last year, the ratio of replacement for oak canopy has been like 6-1, which still seems high, but I kind of get that. But when it jumped to like 19 or 20-1, that seems overkill. And I understand what they're trying to do. My challenge is that a lot of landowners could go out and do a forest practice application or go cut the oak trees down for firewood right now. And you're not prohibited from using firewood, oak firewood for domestic use in your own use. You could log the oak tree down with a forest practice application. So they need to get to some back to reality. How do you incentivize landowners to protect oaks as opposed to making it so difficult for them to protect them that they just end up using the chainsaw on the weekend?
Every day you might put like 100 years old or more,
Uh-huh,
Pretty old, like.
all right. Well,
So I don't know if there were any other, like I said, this is just an introduction. We're not really asking for too much guidance. We just wanted to talk to you about what we're going to talk about over the next few months. Anybody have any other questions for Francis or any other questions on that topic?
I do not.
Just one for stream side buffers. Are existing structures grandfathered in?
They should be, yes. I haven't dug into necessarily the exact code for that, but existing structures should be exempted, or definitely are exempted. And then if you're going to develop that property, once again, functionally isolated, if the building comes between the water body of the stream and where you want to develop, we can typically make the case that you're not impacting anything of substance. So yes. And I think I do think that we will really want to be relatively aggressive in our definition for functional isolation. I think that's something the city could do, just in recognition that, for common sense sake, we get the fact that they want to keep these buffer widths big, but you got to let landowners do what they can with their property with kind of what they've been doing in the past.
Can you go in a little bit into the idea of functional isolation and what that all applies to essentially?
Yeah, so typically a buffer from a stream or wetland, they say, well, if you have 100-foot buffer on that, that's the minimum necessary to keep the pollutants from getting into the stream, from noise impacts to the wildlife that use that resource, whatever. So it could, for example, in 100-foot. But so if your house is 50 feet from that, built years ago, before all the codes came in, you're already in the buffer zone. So if you want to convert that to a duplex or, a more intense development, the buffer's already gone. So you should be able to use that again, or use that area. So that's when I say functional isolation, your activity or your building, house, retaining wall, whatever it is functionally isolating anything upstream or upslope from the stream or the wetland from the resource. So that's where we get this reduced buffer.
I think where that comes into play is like on our waterfront mixed use zoning that we're looking at. We're taking
Yeah.
existing residential and turning it into mixed use. And so that may change the use of that particular structure, but it's not necessarily going to change its location.
Right. Well, and they could say, well, I guess the agency could say, well, one house activity is nothing like an apartment building. And I guess I can appreciate that, but still, there's a little bit of trade-offs in how you look at that. And remember, when you're within 200 feet of any, like the Calais River, there's another set of guidelines, and Todd can explain, of course, that's a shoreline zone. And then there are regulations on what you can and can't do in the shoreline 200 foot. And that's more about use and activity, not so much about buffers.
So the buffer doesn't get mitigated by elevation, right? Because we have a high cliffside on the Cowlitz, but so that's kind of irrelevant to the buffer designation.
No, it can be, and I didn't mention that, but yes, vertical separation is another way to reduce your buffer. But you have to make the case that there's enough, like, I don't know if it's a minimum 30 feet or 60 feet or whatever. There's such a difference between elevations between, high and low.
It's like
Um,
160.
Right. So that can reduce the buffer as well.
Is that a form of the functional isolation discussion, or is that something different?
Yes, it's kind of when you think about it. So if your activity is 100 feet higher than the actual riverbank, okay, what's going to be up there that's would really damage what's happening on the riverbank? Well, obviously erosion or a landslide or whatever could, but the activity is so kind of removed from the resource, not just horizontally, but vertically. A lot of codes have had vertical separation language in there, and we definitely should probably look at that to include that in Toledo's.
All right, well, thank you, Francis, for joining and offering those enlightening concepts to let us all ponder until we get to see you again here in a couple of months, likely with some draft codes and other such things to start working through. So if
Sounds
there aren't any other questions, we can let Francis drop off if that's
Yep.
okay.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. See you again soon enough, I'm sure.
Wow.
So this is something that's not just Toledo.
Mhm.
Lewis County and all the cities within are updating their comprehensive plan, and they all have to go through the critical areas components too.
Mhm.
So everybody in the county is literally dealing with this in some way. Today we had our Plan Growth Committee meeting, and I talked to them about critical areas today. It was one of the agenda items. And I just suggested that we try to coordinate our efforts so that way we're all taking a similar approach.
Mhm.
That way we're not really, it helps because then we're not blazing a trail all on our own or going in a slightly different direction than everybody else. If everybody else is saying, oh yeah, okay, 300-foot buffers are good. And we're saying, oh no, we want 100-foot buffers still. That's not going to work out, right? Obviously, we're going to get pulled back into compliance with the rest of the people if they're all in a different direction. So I'll continue to coordinate with Lewis County and the other cities through that Plan Growth Committee meeting, and make sure that we're at least somewhat in alignment. We can talk more about that as the months come up.
Have you seen any reaction from communities that do have oaks all over the place what are they gonna do now sort of thing, or like especially developing cities?
Yeah, well, Francis had mentioned Clark County.
Yeah.
And they work with the state to try to minimize that impact, but they were largely unsuccessful. I mean, simply the state said, no, this is the best information we have, and it seems to apply to your county. So when I've had conversations with others at Lewis County, they want to emphasize that that's just DFW's guidance. That was kind of strong words coming in that conversation, that they don't intend on adopting what the guidance is.
Okay.
They're using it as guidance, and they're going to try to find a way to address the concerns and protect the habitat without adopting the guidance. So I think that's the direction the county is taking. We'll see in the coming months.
It'd be neat if we could combine conservation of an oak stand with our parks and sell credits to people who want to do business.
Well, I think you can, to the degree that the activities in the park don't interrupt the habitat.
Right.
It's not going to be as good of a habitat if you have active uses with barbecue pits and kids and dogs and.
Yeah, you'd have to stick to trails or something simple.
Yeah, you'd have to look at how you were doing that, but you do have trail systems in your parks plan. And then you potentially have future trails too. So you could use those trail areas that have lower impact activities. So that is a good concept. And then you could allow developers to plant mitigation within those. If you establish them as part of your comp plan, we could look at establishing those as mitigation areas.
Or folks that have hay fields that have only been hay fields for a long time can become oak stands.
Well,
Oak banks, what he was calling oak banks, yeah.
Yeah, and those need to be set up through a state process, and Francis actually had set up a couple of those he set one up in Cowlitz County, and then I think there's one that he was working on in Clark County too,
Mhm.
so. But that's working with individuals who actually
Yeah.
put their property into conservation trust,
Right.
and then they sell those credits, and then. They have to establish all the mitigation first, and once that mitigation is established and documented, then they can sell the credits to developers to allow them to develop the land, but at a cost.
Yeah,
That's not insignificant.
no, it is. It's interesting because the diversity of your tree species will increase your credits that you can get in years before. So having a monocrop or just oak trees is just an interesting thing to me. Like it isn't.
I'd imagine you put other trees with them, but yeah, I get your point.
Yeah,
But because you don't wanna have it just one tree, right?
no, you don't.
If you have to plant 200 trees, you don't get credit for the other trees that you.
Exactly.
Right, but you
Yeah.
get.
So it doesn't motivate you to plant a diverse
Right.
forest.
Right. Yeah.
It motivates you instead to plant a monocrop of
Right.
the ones that are
Yeah.
that are required for regulation.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it'll be an interesting couple of months to go through all that
At
stuff.
that point.
We'll do the
Yeah.
boring ones first, and then we'll get into the good
A
stuff.
lot of ecology discussions coming up.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so does that conclude the critical areas discussion? Anything more, guys, about that? No? You want to move on to the fire impact master plan?
Sure.
Yeah. Chief, you want to lead this?
I definitely can. I wasn't sure if you had time to review and wanted to ask questions, or if you wanted me to give you kind of the background overview as to what this is and what I'm thinking about.
I think you should probably give the background and
Ladder.
then, yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
So, like everyone else, we were working on our own capital facilities assessment and plan. With that, also looking at our needs assessment, right, trying to stay ahead of growth and understanding what does the future hold, right? What is our growth projections based on call lines over our paths, and what we're seeing as far as growth opportunity with new developments and businesses and things coming to the area. And establish our 20-year plan as to what that's gonna look like, personnel wise, vehicle wise, and what have you. And with that, we know that's gonna have a huge impact on our facilities, our existing station. And so the prospect of either remodeling what we have in place or relocation has to be looked at hard. And the needs assessment, or the study that we did, the program that we put in place was to do just that. We looked at our growth projections for personnel. We also took into consideration that our facilities are very old and they're not up to standards. And so, of course, in order for us to come up to standards, there's a lot of requirements for us to do as far as retrofitting, public space, restrooms, living quarters, you name it, right? That would have to come up to code if we were to do anything with our existing facility. So knowing that we had the two options, either to remodel or relocate, we hired a consulting firm to come in here and tell us exactly what that is, right? What that is going to entail and what are those potential costs. The McKinsey group that we contracted this is their business. We did an RFP. They were awarded this study to come in here and help us with this. They are a full service organization, everything from the initial impact studies all the way to full build and delivery of a public, facility. Fire stations are one of their bread and butter products. They're all over the Oregon and Washington territory, with a lot of very recent builds as well. They have templates in their program that helps us with the square footage assessment, right? So when you're looking at apparatus bays, or even just our dirty storage rooms for gear and extractors and showers and things of that nature, they have templates that show this is the amount of space you need for these types of rooms, depending on how many personnel, how many trucks,
all of
this is your
scale.
square footage.
Yeah,
Right?
sure.
So they looked at that and they also looked at our existing facility and said, well, let's see what it takes to retrofit this building to fit your needs. Well, they did that and they came up with a fairly hefty price tag, but also gave us the bad news that without us acquiring a substantial amount of land around us that we did not own, such as the two lots behind us that are currently owned by the city, that would be possible in order to get the square footage we needed. And in the end, there was no way for us to add any more apparatus space, which is our key thing. We will require more ambulances, we will have larger fire trucks, we will need more. And so the existing facility, just from a design perspective,
Won't cut it.
wasn't gonna be sufficient. So they looked at, a number of other factors as well, right? Where it is located, they pointed out to us, it is an flood zone. They pointed out that the impact to the city center as growth continues in this intersection, this is not a good place for us to be for the future. We're not gonna be able to get our trucks through those intersections if they get any larger. If we are busier, we're going to have traffic impact and other things to consider. So they said, you know, a lot of red flags, a lot of issues with staying put.
Okay.
It's not a long-term plan. So then they looked at options for your relocation. And relocation is touchy because you have to be concerned with your ability to respond to your existing population, right? You have to look only so far out to ensure your response times are not impacted. Just because you're moving doesn't mean anyone's going to accept going from a 1-minute response time to a 5-minute response time, because we wanted to be located somewhere on the other side of the river, for example. So they looked at a lot of available properties, not necessarily on the market, but that was not currently developed as potential candidates. They did traffic studies, they did impact studies, they took a look at the zoning and all that other type of thing. And then they also, with conversations with you and the county about UGAs and growth projections and stuff, where we're gonna see population densities. They also looked at impact and our reachability to those areas as well as things grow. They came up with a couple of recommendations. And then also came up with a cost for a total greenfield station build. And with that, they're almost exactly comparable.
To the refit,
Yeah, to the retrofit,
Okay.
which does not give us much, right?
and that
Well,
still doesn't give you enough space.
Still
So-
did
so
not
even-
address
yeah.
anything for equipment. Now,
Right.
I can move up, I can move out and add bedrooms and accommodate staffing and things of that nature for the foreseeable future. Again, with acquiring land that we do not currently own. But again, all the other red flags as far as where we're located, the potential impacts of our city's future, that type of thing, there's a lot of concerns. So they did the costs of both options. They were very, very comparable, if you will. So the cost analysis then rolls into our total facilities plan, which also says, okay, what are your existing assets and liabilities? What are the new trucks you're going to build? How much do those cost? What does your equipment costs? All those types of things to come up with basically our total sum of investments, if you will. This leads us to impact fees, right? So what's driving our need to add trucks, build a bigger station, or relocate or what have you is the growth. And so therefore, this is what is required. We have to assess all of those potential and basically what we're gonna expect as cost to build all of this and to staff these things and to grow. A portion of that is gonna be attributed to impact of new development. So this is how you come up with your impact fee. You have to determine what is that rate of growth. You have to be able to justify what those expenses are, right? So if we had a sizable station that was available for us to grow into over the next 20 years, that wouldn't be a considered factor. But in our case, it is not. We have no room for growth.
Sorry, it's my blood sugar.
So, so the impact fee analysis that they performed also did incorporate all of the growth projections and the data that they received from you and from the county. Unfortunately, our projections, what we can see in the foreseeable future, we know is going to change drastically. So anything we have here is going to continuously have to be reevaluated and reviewed, right? If what they projected as a 2% growth year after year could turn into 15 to 20% by third year once we see them breaking ground and starting development, right? As things start to take off. So we'll have to readjust and reassess as time progresses.
Mhm.
But ultimately, what they came up with is, for us, the maximum defensible impact fee.
Okay,
Based on the growth projections, based on what we know we serve, right? So there's the categories of commercial, residential, whatever it is. They took a look at how many of the percentage of those types of calls that are the biggest generators, right, of use. Which is gonna drive more fire trucks, more ambulances, more whatever. They take a look at those growth projections in those areas and they calculate a fee based on those categories. Commercial, light industrial, residential, whatever the case may be, schools, government, that type of. And so what you have in that plan is their financial analysis with all the background data that leads to their recommended fee schedule. But again, that is the maximum defensible fee schedule, meaning impact fees can be contested, they can be reviewed. To see as how far off they are, right, as far as establishing a fee for just fire protection services. But this is what we can show as far as evidence that states. For whether it's a single family residence or a multi-family dwelling, whatever it is, these are the fee structures that are in place that we can defend. Impact fees can only apply to a percentage of those costs, right? And I think it's 33%, I believe was the calculation. So if we're looking at, for example, $35 million facility, only 12 million of that can come from impact fees. So again, even if we were to collect on the maximum amount for all of the projected growth, we would only net 30% of what we actually need to fund the growth. And that is a state requirement. Those are the restrictions stated on us. So for anything we spend out of the collected impact fee, it has to be closely guarded, it has to be
oh, yeah.
applied accordingly.
Mhm.
So it is not the be all end all solution to us, but it is the guarantee that anyone coming new who is paying an assessed fee is applied towards that growth.
Mhm.
So as we acquire new trucks, a percentage of that truck would be funded by those fees collected.
So this might be a question for Todd, where do the other 2/3 come from?
The other 2/3 come from district revenues. So either grants,
Great.
loans,
Okay.
or
Bonds or whatever
Or
the
bonds,
case may
yeah.
be,
Okay.
levies, yeah.
Because this has been a topic since I've been on the commission. It's awesome that you got the report back from these folks. It's great news. I've never heard that it was just 1/3 for the impact fee, that they could only use 1/3 of it. I never heard that.
Well, it's
It's very
based
interesting.
on your study, right? So if it's,
Yeah, so it's based on, it's what we can allocate to the growth. It's their portion of the impact, right?
Mhm.
Because we can't expect all new development paying a fee is gonna.
Pay the
fill
100%.
station, But everyone collectively benefits from that new station, so that identified percentage is exactly just that. You have this much expected growth to your existing community, and when you look at that, it's a 30% growth. from-
but schools will be different,
Schools are very.
parks will be different, I'm sure, streets, because it's all a different impact.
Right.
So the percentage. will be
Because of what they serve, right?
Right.
They serve a finite market. They're not exactly going to impact, collect an impact fee from
Sure.
a commercial building.
Sure.
Or a distribution
And
center, however,
fire.
we are providing fire and
Yeah.
aid to those facilities, we have a fee, so.
And is that comparable to the police? Do you guys know?
so
It's like,
Police
police
can't-
can't
Yeah,
assess an impact fee because they're not a district, they're a department.
okay, That's
So
the city.
that they're fully funded by the city.
tax
Um,
dollars.
And that's tax dollars, so they're in a different category, they're not eligible to collect impact fees. So just like Public Works can't collect impact fees for their maintenance shops and other things. You can collect impact fees for water and sewer improvements, but not for the Public Works departments.
Right.
Planning departments can't assess impact fees for
Okay.
planning services, I mean, so it's limited to districts within the city limits. And similar to what we had discussion with schools, only cities and counties can collect impact fees. The districts themselves don't collect the impact fees, the cities collect those as part of the charge for development. And then they pass those fees back to the districts that have established.
Yeah, your cities and counties want growth, they want prosperity, but they of course want to have schools to educate the children and the fire departments to respond
Sure.
where necessary, so. The impact fee was the way to
Mhm.
address that growth, right?
Mhm.
As it's rampant, as it's happening. They're paying the portion that's required for the capital investments, right? That's not covered by your regular tax dollars. Tax collection that exists today keeps the lights on. That's what keeps us in business.
Mhm.
Our budget comes out of that. Anything left over goes into a capital fund to allow us to buy the new trucks or to finance new trucks and to do those things. But it's not, right? It's usually an amount that helps you stay ahead and stay compliant, right? Not have your stuff age out and keep it running, but the larger purchases, you end up having to go back out and either look for federal funding, grants, or other sources. And impact fees were one of the things determined as a way to collect from.
Yeah, I just thought it was gonna be more substantial than one. Just,
We would love to see that.
yeah.
But it is also fair, right? It does make sense that they should not foot the bill to build your new station.
Yeah,
Yet the existing community as well benefits from, right? So that's why it is proportionate, that's why there's an actual percentage. But this is why it's a very difficult thing for a lot of cities, counties, and department to do this work, is because it does not give you, it is not the end all solution. This isn't gonna be the answer to all your financial needs, that, you know, you're gonna collect this money and you're gonna be able to run off and build something. It can only apply to a portion of it. There's still other funding sources required to get you to that finish line.
Mhm.
Even if I collected enough to build that station, it can only apply to a percentage of that.
Right.
it's interesting how the zoning rules would help make sure that impact fee goes a longer way.
It would, yeah,
Right, so-
and yeah, it definitely would, but see, again, those percentages and those fees and everything is based on what we know today.
Yeah,
How much they generate as far as business from us, if you wanna call it that, right? You know, how many times are we responding to a commercial business as opposed to a single family home type of thing?
and based on prior calls that you get.
Exactly, it's based on history, we will continue to assess that, if we see that balance change, that fluctuates things, that could cause fees in some areas to decline, others to go up, because again, their impact use increases, or if we
That makes
see
sense.
more development in a one area, those fees may come down because there's more contributing to
Mhm.
that pot, if
Yeah.
you will.
Mhm.
Well, so only if you have sub-districts.
Only if you have sub-districts, yeah.
So if you just have an impact fee for your fire district, then it is meant to offset the cost of the full district. So if you have a centralized area of development, you're still funding a portion of all of those facilities that you have the service for, not just that one that's in the neighborhood.
Mhm.
The 1/3 is used in the calculation for the impact fee. So when they're collecting an impact fee, it's set up to only fund 1/3 of that.
Right.
So, so you have the total cost of everything. So it doesn't mean that the district is gonna be in a position where they collect 100% of the impact fees to fund a new station. They're only collecting 1/3 of those. There's an accounting that goes on behind the scenes, and impact fees come with a lot of accounting strings attached too.
Much strengths.
You know, you have to spend the funds within 6 years of collecting them. You have to, you know, on certain percentages of projects based on what you've established in your impact fee program.
Prioritize the project,
You need to have the study that you had to know that.
yeah, we have a study as well, in
Yeah.
order to, again, be able to justify what those expenses are. And fees will vary, right? If we had a brand new station and all we had to do was for a handful of trucks, you may have a fee of 38 cents a square foot, you know, because your overall growth isn't expected to be much. But if you're in a district like, for example, ours, where there's a genuine need for larger facilities, the fees are according to what it takes to serve the community.
Right.
So to look at the table and to give you some context to that, this is table 12. And I know that we had a lot of interest from council when the school district was talking about a $15,000 a door impact
Yes.
fee.
Yes. I remember too.
Especially because their study only supports about 3,000 or 4,000, but But in this case, we are talking about a single family dwelling, $8,224.42 for a fire impact fee. So that is obviously a reasonable amount. The study supports it. Unlike the school districts where their study supported something significantly less and they were asking for something more. But all of those costs will be added to development within the city. And the county has yet to commit to collecting impact fees. So within the city, we are free to establish impact fees, adopt capital facilities programs, and do all the things that we need to do, and we can collect those fees on development. But the reality exists that somebody a block away that's in the county is not going to pay impact fees unless the county also adopts impact fees for the same things that we do.
Right.
Interesting.
And that's my challenge, right, is
Yeah.
my fire protection district goes well beyond the city.
Right.
And I still have the same need. I still have the same growth projections, and the impact that my study shows is the impact and growth everywhere. It's the entire growth area. So I have that next battle is to work with the county, who again is not collecting for any fire protection district, but they are talking about.
And that
They
happens,
understand.
that happens anytime anybody builds outside the city. Right, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Where do you think the larger growth and the larger projects are, right, is
Yeah.
outside in the county.
Yeah.
Control land, so.
Alright.
The fee schedule itself is something that we are still, assessing. That table that you see on, what is that, page 11 or 12, which was kind of an example calculation of tiered structure. The tiered structure is a new law, I believe maybe a year or so old, that was put in place to ensure that for single family dwellings, that the fee was applied proportionately and fairly. Unlike with the multifamily dwellings where you can do it per dwelling, they did not allow this for single family homes because it wouldn't be fair to establish a single fee structure, a single fee for an 800 square foot tiny home versus a 3,000 square foot, dwelling. So the calculation either needs to be in the table format, which in their case is provide an example where you can do kind of a range, right? 800 to 1,000, 1,001 to 2,000, whatever the case may be, and apply your fees so that everything within that range pays a specific fee. Or like commercial and some other areas, the more fair way to do it is just to apply a square footage value. That way it's real simple. If you're building an 800 square foot home, it's 800 square feet times X. If you decide, no, things have expanded, I'm gonna build 3,000 square feet, you can do the math and know exactly what your fee schedule, what your fee is going to be. That is the true way to ensure that everyone's paying the amount. That is fair, if you will. But I have not seen, most of what I've seen for fire published impact fees is still a set value. Not a lot of them have, if they've made any changes, they've just gone to a square foot. Just to make it easy for compliance sake and not do these tables.
Yeah, so Chief, are you saying that this table 12 is just a draft and those aren't real numbers? Or it looked like they were fairly complete, what was in the?
They were close. It was a recommended way to split it up. You can see when you get to the higher percentages. Are you looking at exhibit 16?
I'm not, I'm looking at exhibit 12. Impact, the fire impact fee schedule, and that is on page 12.
Yeah, so that is the one for, so that is the recommended fee schedule for all the different, land use types. When you go to exhibit 16, this is where they state the new state law that says you cannot establish a per dwelling for single family. That for single family, it now needs to be applied either by square footage or by providing a table of varying square footage requirements so that the fee structure is not evenly applied because they are looking at, they're not looking at, all single family homes being built the same size or within the same area, right? We are seeing little 800 square foot boxes, we're seeing 5,000 square foot. So yeah, that's where at the end,
But the irony of that is that a single family residence still takes the same service calls, whether it's an 800 square foot or a 3,000 square foot, it still has the same demand for facilities and firefighters and apparatus.
It does, and when you see the table, the rationale behind that is potentially there's, larger square footage, there may be more people.
Yeah.
And therefore, that's the tiered structures. The easiest way in the end to calculate single family home is just to apply a value per square foot. Just as you would for commercial or any of the other areas. The dwelling one, however, is the only one that still remains, and it makes sense to apply a fee per dwelling. Whether it's an apartment building, a duplex, each unit is considered a dwelling, and there's a flat fee applied to that. That is the only one, if you notice in the fee structure, that there was no way to do some sort of just calculation based on the types of multi-dwelling units you see out there.
It makes sense. I mean, you
A lot
have
of creativity.
1,300 to 1,800 square feet to be 5,000, and then you would think that would be around the standard thing you want a multi-housing to be.
Exactly, yeah. And again, these values are maximum defensible. We can assess, it has to be applied equally if we decide, a lower collection at different rates to ensure that we're not impeding progress and growth, things of that nature. We also want to make sure that as we're looking at, as you're developing land use types, that we apply these FMD schedules accordingly. Right, so that they do match, that somebody coming in here and, all right, this is, I'm building a grocery store, what does that fall under? Is that your light industrial, is that your commercial, and you have a completely different zoning. We would like to have those married so that they actually apply appropriately. It takes the guesswork out of it.
Well, and that's makes it easier for staff on city side to assess those, because again, we're the ones that.
That's
assess
our
those and
objective, is to
collect
make it
those.
as easy as possible
Yeah.
on you, so that we don't have a lot of questions.
If it's a clear match, this matches that, okay, well, then anybody can apply, figure out what the fee is.
They're doing their own.
Yeah, I have a naive question about this, which is how does this get externalized to the actual seller and the buyer of properties? So do they look at this as impact fees? Is it rolled into the sell price or the buying price? How does it normally work?
So every builder, well, okay.
It just depends.
So
They can do either.
So builders, if they're building a commercial or an industrial or a residential structure, the ones that are in it for the business know about impact fees, and they do the research up front and they price it into what they're selling the home for. So if you're going out and you're buying a $425,000 home, that includes the cost of the impact fees. The developer passes those through as part of the cost of the house. In some of the rural communities, you end up with mom and pops that do development and they forget about these things.
Right.
So they get to the end, and they've got a loan out to build a new home for $400,000, and then they get to the end and they go to apply for their building permit, and they have $30,000 of water sewer connection charges, impact fees, and other fees, and we don't have money for that. We can't finance that because we have already a contractor that's bid the project for this much, and
Right.
so for people that don't do the due diligence, we really have to do a good job at educating our public about that. Through whatever channels we can to say, hey, by the way, these will now apply to building permits. The other choices that you have is that impact fees typically apply to all new development. Well, those can also apply to home remodels when you add square footage. So if the fire district chooses to adopt a fee calculation based on square footage, which I wasn't aware of that change in state law, so that's good to know. But once you do that, so now when somebody wants to go put 1,000-foot addition onto their 1,000-foot home or their 500 square foot home or their 3,000 square foot home, we could assess that as part of the building permit for the new impact that's coming as a result of that expanded footprint, because that's the way the fees are calculated.
And increasing more dwellings in their land, same thing.
Yeah, more dwelling space, more room for residents, you could use the same logic. But so for planning commission, our choice will be, our choice will be to recommend a comp plan to council, which includes adoption of the district's capital facilities and comprehensive plans. It'll be council that determines what impact fees get set. We don't, I suppose if you have if you'd like to forward along a recommendation to council that you reviewed those and you think this is fair, you could. But really, planning commissions don't have any authority to establish an impact fee, or that's all done at the council level. It has to be done through a whole host of separate ordinances and resolutions. It's not just the comp plan adoption. That's the basis to allow council to adopt impact fees. So the work we're doing here through the comp plan tees it up for council to be able to collect these or not collect these. But it's not actually part of your recommendation typically to council. You're recommending these comp plan elements, which include these plans and references. So just to be clear about roles, but you don't have to follow those, you know, and you can always, as a planning commission, you can recommend anything you want to council. I know Chair Birch oftentimes does. He throws stuff up and says, I would recommend we do this. And council says, yeah, I agree. Let's go do that. And so you can make a recommendation, but you can also not. Your recommendation could simply be that we adopt the district's capital facilities plan and recommend they consider adoption of an impact fee or not, you know, that it doesn't have to be based on an amount.
Okay.
Yeah, and then my continued work with you is to ensure that we're addressing the different land use types, right? To make sure that fees are applied appropriately where appropriate. Yeah, the idea of establishing inclusions and exclusions is the reality, right? We can just decide, no, if you're pulling a permit for a retrofit remodel or something of that nature, I'm not gonna charge you an impact fee because you're building a patio.
Right.
You know, type of thing, and just make it simple. That's new development, type of thing. There is a fee, that is not in that existing table, but as we read, there's a real consideration for ADUs. And that's a real simple calculation. It cannot exceed 50% of the primary dwelling or residence. So it would be real simple just to apply, you know, a square footage, you know, calculation, but just at 50% of whatever the single family.
I thought I had an upper end cap also.
They do.
Okay.
They do, because they are not to exceed. Again,
Right.
The primary residence. And so what we would do is just, again, do another price per square foot. So if your ADU is 400 square feet or the cap at 1,600, whatever it is, your fee would be rated at about 50% of whatever we charge a single family dwelling.
Okay.
You know, and that is by law. We can't assess the same single family home just because someone's putting a mother-in-law suite on.
Right.
Hey, Chris, you talking about ADUs?
Yeah,
Yeah, the state doesn't have a requirement on how much you can increase the size of the home or the ADU unit based on the existing home, if I'm correct.
yeah, for us, it's not, we're not necessarily concerned with the size. It's the fact that if we're to establish a fee for an ADU, it cannot exceed 50% of the value as, you know, set towards the primary residence. So if I'm charging you $3 a square foot for a primary residence,
Right.
and build an ADU, I can only charge you $1.50 per square foot on the ADU.
Got it.
And that's all, that's the only thing that was established for us, is if we want to establish an impact fee for an ADU, it cannot be more than 50%.
Okay.
And whether or not the big house and the little house are square foot, you know, identical or whatnot, it doesn't matter. The rules apply specifically if the permit is for an ADU. That means it has its own restrictions. It can only be so large. And so therefore it qualifies for a discounted rate.
So Chief, one of the things that I noticed is that the appendices are not included in the draft you sent us. There's covers in there for them, but specifically I was looking for Appendix D, the impact fee basis documents.
I will send this to you.
So, but yeah, the one that you had, the one that was uploaded for planning commission didn't include any of the appendices.
Okay, yeah, I'll double check to make sure. Yeah, I don't know if they were all included, because a lot of the appendices were meeting minutes and things of that nature, but.
Well, I think ironically, Appendix E, meeting minutes, was the one that was included. The rest of them just have the covers.
Okay, yeah.
It's either that or I'm reading it wrong, which is possible.
but unlike. I will look at it. All right. Thank thank you very much. Yeah, been eager to hear about that for a long time. Any more questions for the chief, guys? Nope. All right, shall we move on to the fees discussion?
Yep, so now that we're getting more into permits, I've been looking at the way our fee schedule is structured. I'm gonna have Cindy update the agenda. So you guys will have the Winlock and the City of Toledo fee schedules, if you guys could look over them. So next month, I'm gonna come with a proposed breakdown. And my goal is to be able to tell residents exactly what they're paying instead of saying, I don't know, and what they're paying for. So the way that Lewis County has it set up is they have the item, the fee, what the fee includes, an additional application or fees that may be required. And so the one that we can look at like a subdivision, for us in our fee schedule, it just says subdivision. It might be short subdivision or long subdivision. It just says subdivision. And I had a resident come in and say, well, what all does that include? Well, I've searched our ordinances and everything else. I feel like this fee schedule was kind of put together with a thought process, but I don't know if the thought process just wasn't fully put down on paper. Because at the time, I think it was 2023 or late 22, I'm not sure, but we don't have a breakdown of what it all includes. So when I was dealing with this resident, she says, does this fee include the legal publication? I don't know.
Oh.
Does it include you guys filing the plat for us? Well, I'm not sure. And so the way Lewis County has it broken down, they have different categories, and one of them is a combined department fee. So it tells you for a subdivision, these are all the fees. This is what you have to do for these things. So it's, application, administrative fee, land use review, final map. And so we, a lot of those things we don't do those because it's got, public health services and public works. We've got Todd and we've got Mike Johnson, but and I did talk to Mike Johnson a little bit too. We need to try to narrow down what we're going to be charging them. I feel like additional, we just had one situation where it was a really kind of a tricky situation, was the Grove plat alteration.
Right.
So for us, it was the first time we had dealt with it. And so there was a lot of research that needed to go into it. But it was just, and Todd put a lot of work into it. So we're billing them. I'm billing them for Todd's time, and then I have to bill them for Mike Johnson's time. And it was way more than what Lewis County would have charged for it. Again, Lewis County they had come across that situation before. So I think with situations that need the extra research or Todd time, because he does all of our research for us.
Yeah.
He can, transcribe the RCWs. There is like a stipulation in here or like a side note that says, it covers this much of our city planner's time. And so I can come up with, it covers 5 hours of his time at this. And then in the additional fees, it can say, additional fees may apply after 5 hours. Like what this is going to cover, this fee is 5 hours of Todd's time. If he was going to go any further than 5 hours, I think that's when that contract that we would give them, which basically says that they're willing to pay for the pass-through fees, would come into place, but it would be listed as an additional fee. So there's not so many surprises.
Right. I thought it was very thorough what you did there.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. Well, this is
Excellent idea, Rachel.
Yeah. So, and I think our permit fees are good. I'm gonna kind of look and see. I think we just changed it to where we're adding in all the like mechanical parts. So, Robert goes through and he'll say, there's 15 light fixtures, and he adds those in, into the end permit. I think we added those to our fee schedule. I can't remember, but I don't really want to touch those. I'm just wanting to do like the special use permits, the conditional use permits, the subdivisions, stuff like that. So that way we're just really transparent with residents. And so I will put something together. And then I'll send you over an email and you can let me know, this is how much time I would need, as long as there's not any issues. And then Mike Johnson it's coming his way too. And he's also gonna get me a breakdown of the water sewer, fees. A question I was asked, does this fee include a meter? I don't know.
I don't know.
So, I did have a conversation with him about that and he's gonna do some of the research. I got with Robert and he was able to break down, you know, at least more, I understand it covers infrastructure, but when we have people like that's a lot of money.
Mhm.
And they're like, you literally come out for 30 minutes and do your thing. They don't understand that there's attorneys that are being paid for. There's, you know, the maintenance and all that stuff. But then again, what fund does it go in? Is it going all into our capital or is it going into our water sewer? So, I'm gonna add that to the fee schedule just so we have it included and then we don't have people so surprised and not understanding, why it's like that. So I will have it at the next meeting for you guys and you guys can give me any guidance and Todd, I'll just kind of send you over what I have and you can just kind of let me know and then I can get it off to council, but,
So one of the things with giving that range is it does help to give applicants some certainty. So it's a good thing, because when
Oh, yeah.
somebody knows it's gonna cost about this, then they have a better understanding of it, and then they're less shocked when they continue to get bills for pass-through time and reviews.
Mhm.
In the instance of Grove, the constraint of that fee would have worked well because they were a very simple and easy process on the face. But they actually submitted a short plat application, which couldn't be approved.
Right.
So the cheap and easy way is to deny it. So staff report recommending denial, saying they can't do this. They already did this 4 years ago. They can't do it again. Take that forward, get it through the process. What we instead did, because we have the flexible that flexible ability, is we looked at it and we said, well, you can't do that, but what else could they do? And then I did some research and I figured out, oh, you have a plat alteration in your code. You could potentially use that. And then I walked the applicant through that process, and their surveyor. So in those cases, we provided a direct benefit to the public who was trying to develop, because instead of just getting a no from the city, because you can't approve a short plat. I mean, council couldn't approve it. You all,
Right.
I mean, your code says you can't. do
even
that.
Lewis County wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Lewis County would have just denied it.
Right. Yeah,
I mean-
but it's an RCW, or it's not just Toledo, it's Lewis County.
And Grove wouldn't exactly know, but the flexibility, as you talked about, they wouldn't know the other
Right.
options.
So it's part of, even though these people that are paying these fees are shocked by the fees, they're really receiving a benefit for that, because what we do is something above and beyond what Lewis County would do. Lewis County staff would look at it and say, I can't approve that. They would not communicate to the applicant. They'd instead write a staff report for denial and send it to the applicant and say, you're denied. Because that's what they're paid to do. That's
Right.
you know,
And they wouldn't explain anything.
Yeah, and I don't think it was more that they were so shocked by the bills. I think it was just that I didn't let them know, like, this is, you know, probably like how much time Todd's gonna spend on this, so you are gonna be billed. And then I had no idea that Mike Johnson was reviewing their stuff. So I had no idea a bill was coming from them. And so even on top of that, we have it broken down, Mike Johnson's review is this much, and it doesn't have to be exactly what he's gonna pay, because in the end, it's all gonna even out. We might be a little over here and a little under over here. And then we're not having to charge that 15% on those items necessarily. We can just say $300 for the Chronicle posting, you know, so it will all even out. But I could also issue the permit, or, you know, a bill could slip through and not get to me. And then I'm like, oh, your billing's complete. But at least I know I have a bill coming from you and it's probably going to be about this much. Again, if you're like, there's no way I can complete this in X amount of hours, cool, then I can contact them and say, hey. And so it was more my not having a full grasp on everything with them, to where I should have had the information that they were asking. What is this going to cost me? And I was like, I don't know. And so at this point, I've charged them. I haven't even charged them. So we don't even have a short subdivision
We,
alteration, we don't fee, not
We
not
don't
the
have a plat-
alteration.
we don't have a plat alteration one because those are seldom used.
Right, so Lewis County does, but I'm just saying that there's not really anything I could charge them for. So if I were to charge them the application fee, like let's say we did have $1,500 on there or something, plus the other fees, the sign, the Chronicle posting, mic stuff, it would have been,
But Lewis County wouldn't have ever gotten to a plat alteration in that case.
They would
Well,
deny
I think
it.
that's the point you're making, Todd, which is a very good one, is we're giving service to the community that most agencies would not even approach.
but they would have had the knowledge that an alteration could have been done.
No,
So as I move forward, but they could have said, hey, you can't do this, but we know there's alterations done. And again, that's my ignorance, not knowing, having a grasp on planning stuff yet, and I'm
I think you're
learning.
being a little bit, I think you're being a little bit hard on yourself, Rachel.
No, I don't mean it in a negative sense, but again, if there's information that Lewis County has that we don't have. And so they could have said, we're gonna deny, well, it depends on who you get at the counter too. So they might say, I'm just gonna deny this. But you can come back, they're probably gonna charge you for the application just to deny it, but
So in the case of Grove, I can tell you this because I've represented applicants with applications through the county. They look at the application, they look at what you submit, they see if it meets their code. If it does, they approve you. If it doesn't, they deny you. And then in the case of Grove, they would have looked at it and said, you're in a floodplain, I need an engineer study to do this, and that's a $20,000 study. It would have also killed the project
right,
because that study to create that one lot in the instance they wanted to. Usually when you do a one lot, or whenever you create one additional lot or two additional lots, it doesn't really pencil. You know, I've had clients that have come to me and I've run the numbers for them and saying, okay, well, this is what it's gonna be for all of the time it's gonna take me to get the application put together and all of those things. And then they look at it and they say, well, that doesn't make any sense. The lot's only worth 80,000. It's gonna cost me 100,000 to create it. Why would I do that?
yeah, and I'm not saying that the fees that were being sent in on her stuff are unacceptable. I'm saying that us not being able to give her any like range is unacceptable, and we have to be better than Lewis County. That's how I feel. Like I've been down there, I've applied for permits, and they are so unhelpful. It's ridiculous. And you can see they're charging a lot for their plan reviews too. But it's, being able to have that information and be helpful to the residents and give them some kind of like, this is what it pays for. It could cost more. In the situation with Grove, it definitely costed more just because it wasn't a cut and dry. It wasn't a
cost
black
3
and
or
white.
4 times what I thought it was gonna cost
Right.
when we took the application.
Right, and I think that's fine, but I think just at some point, like saying this is about how much you think it's gonna cost, and then if we hit that breaking point, then we reach out to them. They know what the fees are gonna be. I reach out to them and say, hey, Todd's, or our planner needs probably another 3 to 5 hours or another 12 hours on this job. Can we get the go ahead from you? Like, this is probably what it's gonna cost.
I think that transparency is gonna go a long way to making the relationship better with that process.
Yeah.
It makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question about this? It strikes me in, not that specific case, but just in general, the notion of paying for research for certain use cases to come up. Is there any value in documenting the result of that investigation and making that accessible to the public so they have a clear understanding right away of things that we already know?
Yeah, that's done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And that's what I mean, having that information. That's what I meant, like, by just being ignorant on not having that information. If it comes up again.
Right.
And Todd's like, hey, this has been subdivided in the last 5 years, I'm gonna be like, but I know how to get around that. And it's information that we have. And at this point, it's free to the resident because we've got that knowledge. And that's where Lewis County is obviously, they've been doing permits forever. We haven't.
Right.
And so it's just knowing it's probably this is gonna be 10 hours of Todd's time, most likely. It might only be 3. It might be, more than that on another one, but just having a base and then just knowing what I'm gonna bill. We just add those fees into our iWork system, and I just hit conditional use permit, and then all the fees pop up, and then we're paying, our vendors, and then they're just paying us, and there's not this, I'm paying Todd, but then waiting to get the money back over here, and it's just, it's easier to do accounting.
So then
purposes too.
the expectation then, so the other one that cost way more than I ever thought it would was Cowlitz Meadows.
Yeah, I wasn't here for that, but I've seen them.
We look at how much how much time and energy I've put into Cowlitz Meadows. But again, there, it's because we were proactive and trying to get them through the process and helping them along the way. And even though they had a professional consulting team that's highly qualified to do the application, they still had hurdles with, you know, with some of the annexation work and other things. So if we establish a fee range, is the expectation that the services stay within there, or that we provide the applicant with a higher level of customer service and achieve the end result? You know, because I can tailor my services. Like I said, it's easy for me to look at an application and say,
Right.
this isn't approvable, you're denied, and what do you know, I'm within budget.
Yeah,
But
and
on the other side, and with Cowlitz Meadows, that would have been true too, because what they were proposing wasn't supported on a lot of things. They didn't have the right documentation. They weren't supporting their application properly. And I worked with them and I said, these are the code standards. This is what you need to demonstrate. But I could also not work with them. I could have just written the staff
right, but I
report.
think the end goal is for me to obtain some of your knowledge, and so the groundwork is being done by me. I'm making sure it fits our code. I'm making sure the application is complete. That way I'm not sending you an incomplete application, and I think that's where a lot of it is too, because I wasn't like with Kurt, you know, you're like, nope, you still need this, you still need that, you know, and so it was me not providing you the right information. But once I know this is a counter complete application, it's taking less of your time doing the back and forth. So I think the end goal is in this is to just assume if all of the, you know, T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, as long as those are there, it's probably with good customer service going to take you 3 to 5 hours. And at that point, you're going to know if I send it over, you're going to be like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do this by then. Like, how do you want me to proceed? I get with them. And then we go from there, and we'll have a statement in here, just like they have, that says, you know, extra staff hours may apply. There's even stuff on here that a third party engineer might need to be involved, but there's just that, like, you know, heads up. Cowlitz Meadows and Kurt are a little different because it's what they're doing for a living, but I think moving, and Grove's really the first resident of an actual building permit that I've worked with, so from start to finish. And so all that knowledge is there now. I know what I'm looking for, so that's not going to be you like, no, Rachel, you still need this. I think the time that you spend on a lot of these things, again, with the conditional use permit, as long as it meets our code, the only thing that you should really have to do is review it, do a staff report, and I can do everything else. And the time that you're going to spend now on those compared to what you were going to spend 2 years ago is drastically different.
I think that was the ultimate goal, Rachel.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And let's just don't forget to pay for yourself as well.
Yeah. Y'all pay me pretty good. Yeah.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'll get that over to you, Todd, and you can kind of let me know. We'll try to narrow, and I'm just doing it with some of the, you know, subdivision stuff, so they won't come up a lot, but
I'm sure it's gonna be a very extensive list.
Yeah.
Pretty soon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Happy to help you with that.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I very much support what you're trying to do. It just, you know, in planning and, planning and engineering almost never do fixed fee lump sum. Architects do.
Mhm.
But usually those two disciplines are always variable, because every project, you know, and I often love to joke about this. I do the same project every time, but it's always different.
Right.
Every application, I can't tell you how many short plats and subdivisions I've done. And I do give, maybe that's the way to do it, is as each one comes in, I can give a cost proposal with assumptions. And we can pass that along to the client with their fees. So that way, you know, because I've been doing this long enough, I can usually establish a cost when I look at an application within a certain range of accuracy. So we could always do that too. You know, I could give a cost proposal for each one. I don't typically, I haven't yet for the city, but we could. And that way I would go through the same kind of initial research and due diligence that I would normally do to put together a proposal, and then be able to identify, okay, this is what it's going to take to get this application through. I can tell you that my costs range pretty wildly.
Right.
for
And again, we're
applications.
still gonna have that in there, where with Lewis County, it's the item, it's the base fee, there's a variable fee in there. And then it does say additional fees or permits may be required. And then at that point, we can put, this covers 5 hours of your time. Like a conditional use permit, if it falls within our city code, I mean, it shouldn't take that much time. If I'm doing the the posting and the mailings and all that stuff. We just, we want your staff report included. We want your, your eyes and your seal of approval on it. So at that point, as long as that's the only thing needed, because I've pretty much got those down, as long as it falls within our code. And again, that's me giving you a counter complete, code compliant application. Something like that, we should be able to narrow down.
I think
And the
so.
same thing with the Chronicle postings, they go from $50 to, I've seen them as high as $1,000, so I think just saying they're $300 or whatever, it'll even out at the end, but.
Based on the number of words, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we know most likely a conditional use permit's probably gonna be about $150 to $200 based on our experience, right? So just putting,
It depends on the conditional use and the associated applications.
Right.
In the conditional use that we did most recently,
that wasn't code compliant. So that's what I mean, that fell with, like, outside our standards.
yeah,
That wasn't something that was allowed. So that will be one of those situations where that base fee isn't gonna apply. Because that's more research is needed. There's more work from you that's involved in it. So I'm just saying, an application that's black and white, code compliant, everything's there.
Yeah,
Being able to nail that down, not to the dollar, but like a range. And then just having for everything additional fees, city engineer time or whatever may apply.
but I think that's the spirit of it, is things that are unknown just because of lack of experience or use case experience are, once they're known, they just become something that doesn't have to be billed for again. But the variable stuff obviously still has to be investigated,
Right, exactly, yeah.
every application is different.
Yep.
They're,
I hear you.
so. I think that's the challenge in all of that, and I'm happy to establish some ranges that are fairly tight with some assumptions. I do that all the time when I bid on projects, right? So
Right.
I understand how to do that. I just think that as we get into that process, we're gonna realize that the typical doesn't fit anything really.
Right,
Because nothing's ever typical. There's always something about everyone, and this is true in every jurisdiction that I work in. Some of them are quick and easy and take me a couple of hours. Other ones, it's the same application, but it takes me many, many hours.
Right.
So it just depends on the quality of the application. I mean, there's a lot of variables.
Right.
So you
No,
think
and I
there
get
should always
that.
be an initial review in which you assess how much it's gonna be.
Well, I think that might be a more accurate way to. I mean, certainly going in and saying, okay, well, this includes 5 hours. Well, 5 hours, we know what that costs, and that's easy.
right,
But to go in, but then when it goes past 5 hours, the expectation was 5 hours. We've set the expectation. So now if it takes 7 or 10 or 15 or 30, then why did mine take longer? Well, yours took longer for these reasons. So maybe another way to do that, and that's what I was suggesting, is I can actually give a proposal at the beginning and say, based on what I've received so far, here's my assumptions, here's, just like when I put together any other cost. When I work for a private developer, that's what I do. I don't do that for cities because it becomes a little bit cumbersome, but you don't have a high volume of applications, so I could do that for you.
perfect. I'll dig into it a little bit and then I'll reach out and kind of see which ones we can nail down or which ones are gonna need an actual, like,
Yeah.
like a bid or whatever, so. But I will have that at the next meeting and then you guys can
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you.
thumbs up.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
down.
it's great. And especially just like you'll be able to say, you won't always say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like-
That's not the answer. I like-
She doesn't always say
I don't think you let you-
I like giving, because then we end up on Facebook and people are mad. It's always my fault. I don't want it to be my fault anymore.
I don't think I could have gotten through most of my priority if it wasn't for Rachel.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's.
Did I deny your permit?
No,
Oh.
but my first.
It was one of the
an
first
open
ones
question.
too, so yeah,
Yes.
it's there.
Which reminds me, I'll ask the question.
Yeah.
Go.
All right. So yeah, anything more about fees discussion, guys? Nope. All right, let's move to D, medical facilities zoning. Who's gonna talk about this?
So I can start us off. I think the question came up about our zoning code and do we need to tighten some regulations in there? And I included a zoning map that shows where the zones are, and this is an unadopted zoning map. This is the one that we've been working on. And then I also included the unadopted zoning code, as well as some information from MRSC about citing for essential public facilities, including treatment centers for drug and opioid addiction. So I don't know how much of that all of you made it through, but basically it looks like medical offices are permitted uses in our commercial zone and in our mixed commercial zone. So in those two zones, and they are just permitted. There's no special requirements in those two zones.
And that includes like a methadone clinic, that's more than medical, isn't it? Like an office? I believe
Those,
there's some,
but those are how they would fit into our, because we didn't have an expansive, so in some jurisdictions, they actually use the NAICS tables and they adopt those, and those have very, very specific uses. So you can see methadone clinics fits under this subcategory, fits under this
and
subcategory.
it's medical.
They're medical.
So I think Winlock has their medical stuff that has to go be approved through council. I don't know if that's doable.
Well, we could make that a conditional use, and then it would take
Yeah.
some higher level of review. We could separate out, and we can specifically separate out that one. You know, we could say, you know, drug treatment facilities, inpatient and outpatient are conditional uses. We could just put that add that as a line item into those two codes that allow offices and medical offices. And then those would be conditional uses. So
Did it
that would
not
be
have
an
the
easy way.
The conditional use, I thought it was.
We have conditional uses in there. We have permitted and conditional uses listed in there. In the commercial zone, medical offices are outright permitted. And also, I believe in the mixed commercial was the other place that I saw that. So the simple fix for that one instance is just list that use and say that it's a conditional use in Toledo. And I can, and that's the easy way to do that. We have to allow them. We can't disallow them in any other zones. You know, we have to allow them someplace within the city. We could specifically then only allow them in the commercial zone and not the mixed commercial zone. So we could just simply by saying that offices excluding, you know, medical offices in general, or offices excluding, you know, inpatient, outpatient drug treatment facilities are not allowed in this zone. And then in the other zones have them be a conditional use. So that's kind of the general setup for addressing that specific concern. But I think that led me down a bigger path when I was looking at that, in that, you know, there are many uses that might fit into some of those broad buckets.
Yeah.
You know, when I was adapting your previous code, I wanted it to be more clear and more consistent and more laid out, but I didn't really go to the extreme levels with that. You know, like I didn't try to adopt NAICS tables with different tiers of development and different, you know, because those things expand by the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-digit codes that they have for each subcategory of use. And then usually what a community will do is they'll go down to, you know, at least 4 or 5 numbers. And then they have all those NAICS codes, and anything underneath that number further down the tree is regulated similarly to up the tree. But in that case, you have, you know, you'll have 20 pages of uses with permitted, conditional, prohibited, you know, that sort of thing. So that's not the way we went.
Is there a distance, like how a weed shop would have to be so far from a school? Now, is there a distance for a drug treatment facility
Well, so that's the other
that have to
thing.
be from schools or?
That's the other thing that we could do. I mean, there are some state standards, but not for drug treatment facilities. Just like your marijuana code is like your marijuana facilities code is the largest section of your land development code.
Yes.
And that's because we're very careful to follow all the rules. So we could also develop a similar section for drug treatment centers and facilities, and we could make them a conditional use subject to a whole new code section. And we can make that as simple or as complicated as we want.
I think that's the right choice.
Yeah, but I gotta say, from a social aspect, I guess, is that I believe the one in Winlock is not a methadone clinic, but a counseling center.
It's a recovery clinic for people on Suboxone, or for people that are
On
on
Suboxone.
Suboxone,
But
which
they-
is,
But they're not doling out pills.
no, they're getting people off Suboxone.
Right.
Suboxone is just as bad. So they're
Right.
literally trying to get people off Suboxone. It was blown out of proportion.
Exactly, that's
It did
my
get
question.
taken to council. So there was a guy that was here and he was trying to buy a weed shop. And because of our codes, he couldn't hear. And so he went over there. The same guy is the one that opened up the medical facility. They took it to council. I do think they've got a conditional use or something that they've got some kind of stipulations. It was brought up to council. It never got on for a vote. And then later down the line, it seems like there was work being done. And so that brought up the fact that no permits were pulled, something along the lines. And then that's when they discovered, okay, these people are actually opening. I don't know what all went on after that, but there was supposed to be a council issue there. And I think it had to go back to council, but yeah, it wasn't like, they were just like, yeah, let's, open it up, and they don't have any codes on it, so.
Yeah, Pitchfork's got out really
Yeah, they
quick on that one.
So these codes and maps are still at planning commission for discussion, right? We moved on to other comp plan topics, but we haven't yet had a public hearing on those or anything like
Right.
that. So we are still free to dive in and make more changes if you want. I just wanted to put this in front of you so that you can give me some direction, and maybe in our next meeting next month, I can bring you back something that follows your direction.
So the concerns that we may have about location and how that would affect the overall planning, could these be addressed through zoning rules for a particular type of business or anything like that, or?
We can add a section just like you have in the marijuana code that deals with all sorts of things.
If you're gonna build this type, then it must have these facilities, must have this much parking area, you must have no loitering, and you have to have facilities to house people inside, like, you have to think it through as what we actually care about, so that they build it in the way that we find acceptable. I guess that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think doing the conditional
Yeah.
use for medical facilities is probably best with that second section that we can work on later.
So if you make it a conditional use, then you open it up to compatibility and the discretion of planning commission.
Correct.
So do we need a whole bunch of regulations that are specified in there for design, or can we implement those on a case by case basis? Because if we have those conditions in there that says this is what it's going to be and going to look like, but that doesn't really fit in this case.
That's
and it
true.
Well,
comes
that's
in
what
front
that
of you
second
all.
section would be, right? If it doesn't fall within these
Yeah,
stipulations, or if it does fall within this range, there would need to be a conditional use.
I think I'm trying to say, well, I guess that's yet another way that I wasn't describing. So that way could be, you set up some parameters and say, if you have this, then you're permitted. If you don't have those things, then you can move on to a discretionary review through our conditional process. So that's, I think, maybe more what Rachel was describing. So we could set it up the inverse, so that if you do these things, you're permitted. And if you don't do those things, then you may still get approved through our conditional use process. That's one way to do it that I hadn't thought of. So very creative thinking. The other way that I was suggesting is that maybe we make it just a conditional use, and then we let the planning commission's discretion apply to what is needed to mitigate in any specific instance, and not develop a whole other code section.
That's, yeah,
volume.
I think that's probably the best.
Yeah, because the volume of people applying for this particular use case may be rather small.
I believe it
So we
is
could just address it on a
smaller.
case by case basis.
Or not.
Any medical facility would be a conditional use permit, conditional use. And council or planning commission would have to look at it
Yeah,
on a case by case.
on a case by case
But there won't be
basis.
that many cases.
It also
Right.
catches what you may not be thinking about tonight.
Yeah.
Or a
Right.
month from now, or.
And it helps us build our use cases where we get to see a bunch of different scenarios, and we kind of know what's okay and what's not okay as the city grows or whatever.
Well, then we're also, like you said, mitigating, if there's extra parking needed or police presence needed or, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of conditional use, as you know, Todd, because it gives us the leeway to do the things we want to do, as we did with the commercial development sites that we were talking about before. But,
Yeah, so I thought that might be the preferred option. I did hear Commissioner Hill say that medical offices should be conditional uses. So should that be true? Should we just say any medical
Any
office?
medical facility, really.
I was thinking that we are going to encompass all of them. Yes.
So if a dentist wants to come in and open up an office,
Record.
Well, probably that, sure.
is that a conditional use permit?
Well, unless he falls into the mixed use area.
I'm okay with Dennis.
But I think what you're saying is there
You
needs to
know,
be a
so-
delineation, right?
So if a doctor comes in and wants to hang up a shingle and open up a doctor's office, is that a conditional use?
I would say no, because if we're making more hoops for people, like I would love a chiropractor in town, a dentist in town, if we're making more hoops for them to jump through, I mean, those are.
Yeah, so we have to be specific about what the conditional use is gonna apply to.
So then I'll,
Maybe it is simply, drug treatment.
Right.
so then I'll do that research and make sure that I narrow it down to that,
Yeah.
to those categories of uses. And I'll just make those conditional uses and not work on another code section with standards?
Yeah.
Is that,
Yep.
Right. And I just want to go on record as saying, I don't have anything against drug and alcohol treatment facilities. I mean, I think, that, you know, they do a wonderful service,
In Centralia.
but we, you know, we just need to. Yeah. Not in my backyard, please.
yeah, well, so that's
NIMBYs.
that's a wonderful thing to get on the record for Commissioner Hill.
All right.
So that I have guidance, I'll bring back code for you to take a look at next time that hopefully hits close to the mark on your guidance.
Let's go.
I know everything about those clinics and everything. I deal with people like this.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want these people here.
No.
But it takes a long time to clean Toledo.
This
Yeah.
is on
To
YouTube.
clean the box again.
Yeah.
I'm with
exactly.
you.
And give it to you Sunday, a lot of, and I asked them because I with them, okay?
Mhm.
A lot of those people go back there to get treatment, get the medicine, somebody wait for them, sold the medicine.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, how that thing work, okay? You're supposed to, before you get the medicine, you're supposed to be drop pit sample. So you're selling the medicine, you don't have it in the system. How that work? I like to know, you know,
Get a different vendor.
well, you know, for the doctor, James and opioid,
It's just as bad.
this way,
Yeah.
this is
It's all
like,
bad.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Because the one in Olympia, the new one over here in Dunwoody, that's in 99, so they put a new one. And I take people right there, you know, to get a prescription there and, pretty soon everybody showed up. And people come on and so nice event, come on, guys. You're supposed to be training, you're supposed to be treated the problem. But the people gave the money to you to go back there, cause more problem, you know,
Yikes.
and I said,
Oh, yeah.
Sounds problematic.
Mhm.
and people, you know, want to tell them, little tell them like
They
this,
do
yeah,
need cheese.
what will happen here?
That's what the conditional use is for.
Yeah.
Make sure it's run chip shop.
What I did,
In Centralia.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's very, very.
Yeah.
Stay away from.
Fourth Avenue over here.
So I just want to remind you guys.
Yes.
Yeah, we're done.
2 hours.
Yeah, we're almost at 2 hours.
2 items.
Jeez.
Well, and it was a packed agenda tonight. The critical pieces are always the comp plan and other discussion items. So at the point when you guys get worn out and want to table the rest of these items, we'll bring back the leftovers. I knew when I was working with Carly, putting together the agenda, that there was too much on here probably.
Ambitious.
So, so I.
Yeah, we can go till 8 and then we'll shut it down at 8 and we'll just carry anything over.
So at the chair's discretion, I think, you know, whenever you're ready to.
I think I agree.
Steve's at home already, so he's all right.
Yeah.
Sleeping.
Yeah, he's in between items.
Yeah.
But if you have the stamina for one additional item here, and this again is maybe a little bit more than an introductory piece. It had been mentioned that it would be great, just like we did in the residential code, that we have design guidelines now that we've kind of built in, some very general ones that kind of help to guide. The thought was, well, we don't have anything for our commercial code. Right? I mean, here we are regulating residential, but we don't have anything similar for commercial zoning codes. So what I just did some research, basically Googling to figure out what commercial design guidelines there were. There are a ton in California, as I'm sure Chair Birch knows, and I did not pick those. So, but like, you know, North Bend, some of the key pieces are, you know, facade articulation, building massing. So along the face of a building that you see, to have not one flat wall over a certain distance. And then And then also, you know, the massing and the scale saying that, you know, along certain areas that it has to be this height and then it has to step back so you don't get the New York City tunnel effect. You know, from tall buildings up against pedestrian right of ways out in a rural area. So I gave some examples of those. The North Bend one is fairly general, and I think it could work. Long facades must incorporate architectural features such as covered walkways, decorative awnings, or arcades to add pedestrian interest. So that's just a fairly simple statement. Woodinville building facades exceeding 50 feet shall include offsets, recesses, projections, or other architectural features at least every 25 feet to provide visual interest. So those are things that help to reduce the massing of a building. Couple of simple statements, we could add those into a commercial design section of our code, just like we did for the residential design section, or any variation of those.
You want to give us a meeting to go through this?
Yeah, should we just kind of table this to the next meeting, Chair Birch, and then bring it back? And take a little bit more time to discuss it?
Yeah, I'd like to go through it a little more thoroughly than I did, because by the time I got to that, I was a little tired.
I'm gonna stick on this.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
like I said, I knew that I overpacked the agenda tonight, but I also knew that Chair Birch or Vice Chair Dennis might decide to punt some of these items to the next.
Yeah.
These aren't critical that we get through them tonight. So,
Yeah,
well, yeah, the next piece was signs. And we had talked about the fact that we didn't really have a sign code, and I'd mentioned, hey, I just adopted one, and I went through probably about 8 months of work with the planning commission to alter somebody else's sign code to be what they wanted in Kalama. So I just gave you a copy of Kalama's sign code that I just worked on. So it's a lot more complicated than what Toledo's is. It's a lot more complicated than what Kalama's was before we started. But I thought that was maybe a good draft to start with, because it is pretty all-inclusive, and they are a community like you. They don't want to discourage growth or people from using their private property, but they also do want to promote, a good-looking community and a healthy and walkable community. So that too like I said, with Kalama, it was 8 planning commission meetings to get through that. So I don't think I think maybe an introduction to, hey, here's an option. But sign code, we can probably wait until after we're done with the comp plan update at the end of this year and bring it back next year, or even later this year if we happen to get through the comp plan stuff.
Okay.
But I know there was some interest in that, and I promised some information at our last planning commission meeting. So
We also have 4 new businesses in town, 2 of which we approved licenses on today. We've got the bakery there at the Farmers Insurance Building. That's Dawn's Delectables. She's come out of retirement.
That's great.
And going to be trying a small town atmosphere for a sandwich shop and some desserts.
That'll be awesome.
And then the gentleman with the tattoo parlor has been floating on Facebook ideas and asking for feedback on signage and things like that for his business. I believe the cheese shop is going to be looking at the same thing. And of course we have the antique dealer with 505 Gallery, who's just going to be starting up. So
yeah,
it might be more important that we not drag too long into the process.
I agree. Should we just move to public input? Or should we just?
so should we start with signs then the next meeting?
Yeah, definitely table the commercial building design and the signs. I think they go together, like Cindy said.
So I think the sign code can wait longer than the commercial building design. We have to update our zoning code with our comp plan update.
we'll put signs second to it then.
So then signs may fall down a bit if that's okay. Because we have to get through the comp plan, and we have to get through the comp plan. The council has to adopt it by December of this year. And council gets bogged down with budget discussions in October, November?
September.
September. So we really need to get a draft of the comp plan finalized so that you all can have a public hearing on it, and that includes still critical areas. We still have to go through processes and procedures to talk about how we process things like conditional uses and plats and all those other things. So we've got a lot of work to do there. So I'd suggest that signs can probably fall down, way down the agenda. The building design requirements, if we're going to include those in our code, we should do it now, since we're developing that code with the comp plan update.
Unless you guys wanted to come do a workshop an hour before the next meeting, and then we can just give it to Todd and say this is what.
If you think you can do it in an hour meeting, then you're better than any planning commissioner. Well,
Let's give the first meeting a shot and see where we are.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Maybe we do a workshop after
Let's
that.
open up the various cans of worms.
Yeah.
And, put them in a.
Or are we calling for a workshop next meeting?
No,
No,
To
not yet.
determine whether we need a workshop the following meeting.
Exactly.
Got it.
All right.
Again, you guys can make these meetings working meetings, so you don't necessarily have to schedule a workshop, you just dive in and do it.
yeah,
During the, yeah,
Yep.
okay.
but I guess what I'm saying is we do have a lot of work ahead of us
Yes.
with the comp plan.
Yes.
So, taking on any additional things at this point can be done, but it's just gonna push these meetings longer and later or require workshops, so.
Okay.
It's at your discretion though, always.
All right.
Do we have a timeline and all of the things that are remaining to be done and how long we have to do them in? That's roughly.
I guess it just doesn't fit, so I didn't wanna scare y'all with it.
It would be good for us to incorporate that into our thinking,
So we need this much time.
Yeah.
And we have this much time, so.
and we have this much work.
Yes.
This much work and, yeah.
Let me ask this. Why, do you suppose we could have 2 planning commission meetings a month? Would that help?
It would help the comp plan to move along faster. And then we could get through with that, and then you could decide if you wanted to continue with those.
I mean, once a month, that's not very much.
That's true. It's either that or, we had been doing workshops for a while, which gave us extra time to talk through the lengthy items on comp plan, allow us to make more progress, but then you have a 3-hour meeting and everybody kind of gets fogged over after.
Sure. That's why I like tabling it to next meeting and then determining that we will have a workshop after that.
So I think
I'm gonna assume that we're gonna have a workshop after the next meeting.
Or go to 2 planning commission meetings a month, but that takes more.
we would have to change the ordinance for that. We could call a special meeting though, each
Yeah.
month. So if you guys want to have a meeting like the 1st and 3rd, since it's going to be temporary, instead of changing all the ordinances and everything, let's just call a special meeting. So we can do a special meeting 2 weeks from now if everyone's able to come. And then we'll have regular planning commission. And if we still need more time, which we probably will, we'll just call another special meeting.
I think that sounds very reasonable.
Okay, so 2 weeks from now at 6 o'clock
Like we can, yeah,
on a
Yeah.
Wednesday.
March 5th.
So
March
2
5th.
weeks from now might be too soon for me.
but I
Like
think
we can do signs though, and then that's something that we can just dive into on our own.
If we've got the time, I'd really like to focus on comp plan, because I'm only kind of joking with the fact that we have too much
Yeah.
work to do and not enough time. So if you're all committing to more meetings, I would still rather focus on that. I just think my calendar might be full 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
So, but next month we could do 2 meetings next month. And
Yeah.
and that's far enough out where my calendar's not full
I
yet.
think that'll give me some room as well, so.
So if we don't.
Give us some dates, Todd.
Yeah.
It's
so
gotta be the
it's,
1st and 3rd Monday. I can't be here like 7, 8, or I can't be here every week after.
I mean, Wednesday?
after work. Yeah,
So-
it's gotta be, it's gotta be the 1st and 3rd Wednesday of the month, cause I'm already here.
First.
The third
all the
Wednesday,
time.
the first Wednesday of the month would be March
My
5th.
family's not.
Family's like, oh, sweet.
Yeah.
More meetings, huh?
And it does look like I could be here March 5th if you wanted to do a special meeting. on
Yeah,
that.
if you can do that, that would be best, cause that keeps me on track with council and I'm here anyways for
So
everything.
March
So if you
5th
wanna
and
do
then the
the,
19th.
So
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 two
the
meetings.
5th would be a special meeting, and then the first Wednesday. So the first Wednesday of April, I'm actually out of town. Wednesday, April 2nd is the first Wednesday of April.
okay,
So
well, let's do the 5th then, since we have this extra work, and you can make that work?
I can make that work.
Okay, the fifth at
And
6.
let's see how much we get done. So I think if we're focused like that, we can always, in addition to that, call a little bit of a workshop in the following, we can stack up the hours a little more as needed.
So then I'll bring back the comprehensive plan elements for geohazards and the other. Those should be actually pretty easy, so I might actually try to stack 3 of those in our meeting in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I'll move this stuff onto the next, and then whatever else you
So
need.
signs and
We can boot signs. We'll put it on
commercial
a,
building standards, I think, next agenda.
got it.
Or
We'll
you have a
push
question?
signs for now.
Yeah.
Then I'll come up with the changes that we need to make to at least 2 of those code sections for critical areas.
Okay.
Maybe 1. maybe 2.
Public input.
Get public input.
Yeah, okay, let's move to public input.
Y'all got it.
You guys got something?
I have one question since y'all were talking about.
Yeah.
signs.
Uh-huh.
I was thinking about putting a light up signage where it says tattoo on my thing now, about the same size as that.
Hey, Lucas,
Or should I wait till y'all do the sign?
can you say that again? Sorry.
So I was thinking about doing a light up tattoo sign where the tattoo sign is now, the gray one that's up there now.
Mhm.
Should I wait till y'all do the stuff for that? It's about, you're gonna be about the same size, but just set, it'll just say the same thing.
I think it's okay.
I think it's a great sign.
Yeah, I think so too.
Is it currently, because you do have standards about lighted signs.
We do,
don't
and I
remember what they are off
I
the top
can
of my
pull
head.
those, but it's not, it's,
It'll be really simple. It'll just be the letters themselves light up. It won't be crazy like neon.
But do we have a rule where it's after a certain hours, the signs are off?
We have a very short sign code now.
Yeah.
So if you stop down during normal business hours, Rachel or Carly can pull that for you and give you a copy of the regulations that we have.
Okay.
And as long as you meet those regulations, it's a sign permit through the city. And I would not. If you wait, it's likely to become more regulated. And if you-
It'll be a long time, I think. before it's like, oh.
And
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in front of it, so y'all can take your time.
there you go. I would
Well done.
get down here and figure out what the rules are and then submit your sign permit application and get your permit issued. And I would do that without waiting for the new sign code.
Yeah, I'll just,
And Rachel, you should probably research signage on state highways. 'Cause they're-
It's different, yeah,
He's on.
Yes.
okay.
Oh, okay.
So,
Well, so that, I mean, the state may have other requirements too that aren't the city code, but we don't.
it shouldn't
Something
be-
for you to look
It
at.
shouldn't be an issue, but we should at least research.
You might have to put
Give me
a
tomorrow.
oak tree
I'll
on
look
top
at
of
it
your.
first thing.
well, that's what I was thinking, as long as I don't have any oak trees or build anything on to my house, I'm good.
I literally have 3 oak tree saplings right now.
Get rid of them.
I just took your property.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh, my God.
You hear?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Brian.